If a strike occurred, the trucking industry could see enormous demand due to container and boxcar freight that might have to go to truck. A railroad strike would cripple the trucking industry, especially in states like California, where AB 5 is positioned to put owner operators out of business. If negotiations are unsuccessful and cooling off deadlines expire before an acceptable agreement has been made, engineers and train crews could go on strike and completely shut down U.S. railroads. Chemicals, coal, construction materials, crude oil, paper, lumber, auto parts, and new cars would stop moving. Wheat, corn, soybeans, animal feed, beer, birdseed, canned produce, corn syrup, flour, frozen chickens, sugar, and wine would just sit where they are. And perishables would cook while baking in the summer heat for prolonged periods of time in their metal shipping containers. All those containers with names on the side like J.B. Hunt, Snyder, and Swift, yeah, they're not going to go anywhere. They'll be sitting there on the track. Now imagine trying to put all that stuff on trucks. It would make the last 2 years during the pandemic pale into insignificance. With the volume of freight shippers would be trying to move overwhelming all sectors of trucking, not to mention the freight that is already behind schedule on rails like BNSF, CSX, Norfolk Southern, Union Pacific, that's already loaded on cars and stuck out in the middle of nowhere. And I doubt Warren Buffett has giant cranes and forklifts just randomly spread around the country with qualified and certified skilled workers waiting to effectively and systematically unload and reroute all that freight onto semi-trucks and tractor trailers. For the economy as a whole, a railroad strike of more than a few days would be like an economic heart attack. And our economy already has a bum ticker as it is. There isn't much more stress it can take and continue to survive. Now, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen voted by mail in mid-July to strike the railroads. That union strike vote passed by a majority of 99.5%. So needless to say, these folks are beyond fed up. The Biden administration stepped in to hold off a strike at least until September. Meanwhile, a board of arbitrators has been developing a potential new contract. Officially or not, the president, Congress, and the U.S. Army always have the power to prevent or break any strike, particularly a railroad strike, and they've done it before. And it's a good bet they'll do it again if they believe they have to. They definitely do not want an economic heart attack. Not right now, not this close to midterm elections. But rail workers are fed up, and rightfully so. They've been overworked by the railroads, which haven't been able to hire enough people after mass layoffs during the pandemic, with many previous rail workers reluctant to return. But according to some railroad experts, the current trouble has roots that stretch back to the 1990s when a guy named E. Hunter Harrison implemented PSR, or Precision Scheduled Railroading, at the Illinois Central Railroad. This was a new and extremely strict disciplined system of rail operations. PSR allowed the Illinois Central to cut its workforce and boost its profits. Over the next 29 years, PSR spread to all the major railroads in North America. Investors were thrilled. And inversely, railroad workers were not. Over time, PSR resulted in longer, more profitable trains and much longer hours for workers who are on call most of the time. According to reports, one conductor had to fight the railroad for time off to be at his own wife's funeral. Now, after years of cutting payrolls and overworking their remaining people, the railroads are struggling to meet shipper demands. Poor rail service is stranding containers at sites around the country, including 29,000 empties clogging the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, California, which are still digging their way out of monumental backups from earlier this year. Big shippers are complaining about lousy rail service to regulators in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, contract talks have gone on for 2 years with no agreement. Workers want change, the railroads don't. And conceivably, it could all end up resulting into a strike. Historically, though, railroad strikes have been blocked or broken by the government intervention. The most recent rail strike was in April of '93. It started on a Tuesday, and both houses of Congress had passed a bill outlawing the strike by Wednesday night. The president at the time, George H.W. Bush, was awakened at 1:03 a.m. on a Thursday morning to sign it into law. This put an end to the two-day strike. But not all railroad strikes ended so quickly and so peacefully. During a strike in 1922, the railroads continued to operate with scab workers after 400,000 railroad workers walked off the job. But at least 10 people died in violence as workers battled company security guards and National Guard troops. And perhaps the worst and most infamous rail strike occurred in 1877. No unions were involved when rail workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia spontaneously walked off the job in July. The B&O Railroad had just cut their pay for the third time in a matter of months, and the country had been in a depression for the last 4 years. The strike in Martinsburg quickly spread to other railroads and even other industries. Some local law enforcement sympathized with the strikers, and it looked enough like a general uprising to frighten authorities all the way up to the president, whom ordered federal troops to help companies put down the strikes. Across much of the eastern United States, strikers and sympathizers fought the National Guard, the U.S. Army, and private militias hired by the companies. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone claimed strikers destroyed 39 buildings, 104 locomotives, and 1,245 freight and passenger cars, with an estimated death toll of 100 people who died in the violence, most of which shot by troops and company militia. I can't imagine rail workers in 2022 are so fed up that they would stage an illegal strike, but who knows what to expect nowadays. A railroad strike, although improbable and highly unlikely, we still need to understand the overall catastrophic effects it would have on our supply chain and economy in general. Add on top of that a trucker strike, trucker shortage, and the previous threat to diesel fuel supply and possible shortages as a result of fewer U.S. oil refineries and the Biden administration sending our fuel reserves to Europe and China. So with that being said, we've all seen so many things in the past 2 years happening that we could not have imagined happening before. So who knows what will actually happen next?